This segment is sponsored by Pretium Resources, which has 35-year veteran Bob Quartermain, the man that took Silver Standard on a 100-fold move from 50 cents to $50, who is CEO of Pretium. The company is focusing on delivering value through its high-grade gold project, Brucejack, with one of the recent holes in 2012 delivering an astonishing record on the project of 41,582 grams per ton of gold. And Valley of the Kings now has 4.9 million ounces of indicated gold, which measures a staggering 17.3 grams per ton gold and 10.4 million ounces of 25.5 grams per ton inferred. And the company has begun a feasibility study for the high-grade resources. Pretium Resources, symbol PVG in Canada and on the New York Stock Exchange. This is King World News. I'm Eric King, and you're about to hear from Nigel Farage. Remember to go to our homepage, kingworldnews.com, for more interviews where we've already had Bill Fleckenstein, Gerald Celente, and Rob Arnott. But without any further delay, here is Nigel Farage. Joining us now is Nigel Farage, co-president of the Europe of Freedom and Democracy Group and national leader for the United Kingdom's Independence Party. Nigel, right away, can you give listeners an update on what is happening in Europe?
Strikes. Lots and lots of them. Strikes and demonstrations. Big strikes today all across the Mediterranean, but they're now beginning to permeate northwards. And in fact, there's been a very major strike in Belgium today. I was actually due to go to the European Parliament today, but couldn't get there. No planes, no trains. And ostensibly, the strikes are about protests to government austerity. Now, the first thing to say, of course, is that politicians across the entire West, and I include America in this, have over the last few decades given voters, given people a totally unrealistic level of expectation in terms of what the state can do and what the state can provide. And that fundamentally is why we're in the mess we're in. Yes, I know the banks caused all sorts of problems, but basically we've been living massively beyond our means because politicians have not had the guts to get a grip. So that's the one reason why these protests are going on and why strikes are now becoming almost an everyday feature of life in Europe. But of course the other reason is that many of these countries are now trapped inside an economic prison that is called the Eurozone, something to which they are totally and hopelessly unsuited, and many of them need to get their own currencies back and need to have substantial devaluations. And there is a growing sense amongst people in Spain, in Greece, there is a growing sense that absolutely nobody in their political class has got the courage, the gumption, or the foresight to grasp this nettle, to say it's time to cut the bonds with Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Van Rompuy on the euro. And if people haven't got hope through their own directly elected representatives, then all they can do is take to the streets in increasing numbers. And these aren't peaceful strikes. You know, these aren't just people walking down the road carrying banners. You know, we're talking here about tear gas, rubber bullets, violence, lots of injuries. You know, this is very, very nasty stuff. And I see absolutely no prospect of it ending in the short term.
You know, in Spain, Nigel, I don't have to tell you, we've had multiple suicides just this week from people who were jumping off the balconies of homes as the police were going into a victim and breaking into the units. When you have people that desperate, where they're willing to jump off balconies and end it, and they're in the streets like that, how concerned are the central planners about these types of developments?
They couldn't care less. They're not bothered. They're simply not interested. As I've recounted to you on this show before, when I said to Mrs. Merkel, the German Chancellor, last year, I said, look, wouldn't it be kinder to your taxpayers, and wouldn't it be a liberation for Greece to bust out of this completely flawed euro arrangement, to allow them devaluation and a chance to trade their way back to prosperity? And her answer was no, we can't do that, because if Greece leaves, other countries will leave, and that will be the end of our euro dream. So it's the dream that matters, just as communism was before. It doesn't matter how many millions of people are starving or homeless. That doesn't matter. The great European project must continue. And that's why I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that I don't just disagree with the architects of this European project. I believe them to be fundamentally bad and dangerous people.
It's hard to believe, Nigel, but it appears things are deteriorating even further in Spain and Greece. We mentioned that just briefly there. But when you look at those countries, are they just test zones to see how far human beings can be pressed?
To some extent, yes, because there has been some talk, and we've heard it from the ghastly Christine Lagarde from the IMF. You know, we have heard talk of maybe a slight easing on some of the austerity terms, and that does reflect at least some sense of understanding that if you push people over the edge, you'll finish up with a sort of revolution on your hands. So there is some understanding of it, but fundamentally, whether they go quickly or whether they go slowly, they're going to continue with these programs. And basically, the economic plan for the Eurozone is that Southern Europe have all got to become like Germans. They've all got to behave like Germans, work like Germans, operate like Germans. And you know something? It isn't ever going to happen. Because we can argue about economic differences between North and South. We can argue about political differences between North and South. But the biggest differences between the North and South of Europe are actually cultural differences, attitudes towards work, attitudes towards law and order. These are fundamentally different countries, and the attempt to pull them together under a new form of unelected bureaucratic government is doomed to failure, and I hesitate slightly to say this, but perhaps even to bloody failure.
Nigel, we've talked about the unemployment in Spain and Greece, and the only reason I keep bringing it up is the numbers somehow, just when you think they can't rise anymore, they're rising. Youth unemployment is well over 50% now in both of those countries and rising, and the unemployment rate itself is too. When is enough there?
Well, in Greece, we talked before when it went through 50% youth unemployment. The last figures I saw a couple of weeks back for youth unemployment were 57%, so we're now pushing up towards 60%. And if there's one lesson that relatively modern European history does teach us, it is that if you have very large numbers of unemployed young males particularly, that not only will you see violence on the streets, but you will also see the rise and the growth of political extremism, real, genuine, dangerous political extremism. And I just want to remind your listeners that in Greece today, there is a political party called Golden Dawn. They are unashamedly a neo-Nazi party. They have emblems rather like the swastika. They have attitudes towards immigrant communities and people of different faith and colour that we haven't seen in Europe since the early 1930s. And they are now the third biggest party in Greece. What we're looking at is something, I'm afraid, that is very, very akin to the Weimar Republic and that breakdown that happened in Germany in the early 30s that led to Hitler. I'm not saying Hitler's coming back to haunt Europe, but what I am saying is, isn't it truly astonishing that we've got Nazism on the rise in southern Europe?
You've become such a big figure in Europe, Nigel, and I always like to ask you, what are the people of Europe coming up and saying to you in the various countries? What do they say to you these days?
Well, the feedback that I now get on, social media particularly, the feedback I get from across Europe, and I'm talking, Poland, the Czech Republic, Greece, Spain, the feedback is astonishing. I did a speech about Spain a few months ago, pointing out just the hopelessness of their position inside the Eurozone and why they should leave. And that was translated into Spanish. And, 1 million people saw that on YouTube within 2 weeks, in Spain alone. So there is a huge hunger, there is a huge appetite out there for people who are looking for alternatives, who are looking for boldness, and who are looking for courage. And sadly, they're not getting it from their own political class.
It seems like there's a dark shadow that's casting itself all over Europe and the United States as well. All these states are people inside of them looking to secede now. We haven't seen anything like this since the Civil War. People are just really losing hope here, Nigel, and getting somewhat desperate on both sides of the Atlantic. What hope is there for these people? Because they're very deeply discouraged.
Well, I suppose I do think that things will probably have to get worse before they can get better. But as far as Europe is concerned, this Euro project has to be broken up before it literally destroys the peoples of Europe. And I believe that will happen. I know it will happen. The trouble is that the people holding the cards at the moment are determined to delay that inevitable for as long as they possibly can. So there is a very, very painful period that Europe is going to go through, but it will come out of it. It will emerge. And looking at America, there are one or two good things we can say about America. The shale gas revolution, the cuts in energy prices are certainly helping American industry to a certain degree. So it's not all doom and gloom within the American economy. However, you've just re-elected a president who finished his term of office with your national debt at $16 trillion. And if he carries on with his current spending programs, at the end of Obama's next term, it'll be $20 trillion. that is the size of the U.S. deficit. So, frankly, what Obama is doing, and many in Europe are doing it too, but frankly what Obama is doing is he's basically stealing money from generations as yet unborn who are going to be left with this phenomenal debt burden to pay back. So I think, frankly, as far as the debt's concerned, I think the re-election of Obama leaves me, I'm afraid, as far as that's concerned, pretty pessimistic.
What has you worried then going forward, Nigel? What has you concerned?
My biggest concern, certainly on this side of the pond, my biggest concern isn't the United Kingdom, because I think we are seeing big political change taking place in this country. It's happening, and we will escape the worst excesses of what is going to happen in Europe. I think the biggest worry is that we get some kind of total breakdown of confidence in society, of trust in not just the government, but the police force and the army and everything else. I genuinely fear that we are going to see very large-scale confrontation in southern Europe with, an awful lot of people getting hurt or killed. That's my biggest fear.
And Nigel, as people know by now, you traded gold for over 2 decades, and I always like to ask you about this, but the gold market has been consolidating nicely here, just like you predicted. Thoughts going forward on gold with the mess we're in?
Well, Mr. Obama's re-election and the guarantee that your deficit will continue to rise, the quantitative easing programs that Western governments are now using, which frankly is just falsely printing money to cover some of the holes, all of it tells me that inflation is coming back just down the road, that as yet there are still huge problems within the banking industries, and Spain is very near the top of my list on that, and nasty things are going to happen over the next few years, and at some point in time the gold price is going to be very substantially higher than it is now.
One final question here, Nigel. When does the West hit the wall when it comes to the counterfeiting that you were just describing, the money printing there?
I just don't know. I mean, it's as if governments have found this little loophole, this little way out, and they've almost become addicted to it. At the moment, we have regimes in place who seem to think that it's perfectly fine to follow that kind of monetary policy. So I'm afraid they're going to go on behaving like this for a while yet. And this problem of indebtedness that we hand down to our children and grandchildren is going to become truly horrific.
Nigel Farage, co-president of the Europe of Freedom and Democracy Group and national leader for the United Kingdom's Independence Party. Thank you for joining us on King World News.
Thank you.
Be sure to tune in as we will continue to release interviews with the top people in the world throughout the week. Also, make sure to check out the King World News blog.